And so we come to part 4 video going over the Batman vs Robin animated movie, which came out back in 2015 when Scott Snyder's Batman run was going through the super heavy arc after Batman Endgame, where a final ultimate battle against the Joker had reduced Batman into an amnestic Bruce Wayne, and Commissioner Gordon of all people had taken his place as this robot-suited Batman. At the same time, Peter Thomas's Batman and Robin title had ended after 40 issues, which did resurrect Damian with temporary superpowers after Grant Morrison's Batman Incorporated had killed him off. But none of that has anything to do with this animated movie. I just thought I'd mention how crazy it got after those stories I covered in parts 1, part 2 and part 3 videos in leading up to this part 4 video. It should go without saying, but here it goes anyway. If you came across this video first and only now noticed that its title has part 4 on it, I recommend you to go back to watch those previous videos first. This is not a simple movie review on the movie itself. It is the final part of a 4-part video series where I compare it as an adaptation to the source material that inspired it. Okay, with that final warning out of the way, now let's talk about how this movie came out. This animated movie was directed by Jay Oliva, whose work we have previously seen in the Flashpoint Paradox movie and the two-parter The Dark Knight Returns movie, whereas the writing is credited to G.M. DeMatteis, who previously wrote the Superman Red Sun movie and the For the Man Who Has Everything JLU episode. That makes me very depressed to acknowledge, because I do not want to talk down on either of them on how poorly Batman vs Robin compares to both Court of Owls and Born to Kill. Actually, before starting to compare the Batman vs Robin movie to the Court and Night of the Owls and Born to Kill, I want to make this following disclaimer to absolve both of them from anything bad that I do not like about this movie. If you don't care about Jay Oliva, G.M. DeMatteis, or about the long-term impact that these movies have, feel free to skip to this timecode. Most of the DC animated original movies before and after the Flashpoint Paradox were done to give the people making them work. That excuse, however, does not justify low quality like that on the long run. Remember that these movies are mostly watched by the not exactly general audiences, but by people who are DC fans who don't read comics. Either for not being able to find them to be read, or because they are just too lazy to read. For those people, these animated movies were the introduction to these characters, groups and concepts, which does not make movies like this a good first impression, and can in worst case scenarios color the audience perception to turn potential new fans against them. This is just me making an assumption, but this could be why the Court of Owls ended up being just a lesser faction of the League of Assassins in Gotham and just a stepping stone in Gotham Knights. As another separate example, when you hear people talking about Flashpoint, do you think about the one where the Reverse Flash killed Barry's mom and Batman doesn't use guns? Or about the one where the Reverse Flash has no reason to be in the story and Batman uses guns? I'm going to assume, again, that you picked the latter option, which must be another factor why the 2023 Flash movie was rewritten into another Flashpoint adaptation without the Reverse Flash in it at all. This is why I feel like I have mostly spent the last 3 years of my YouTube career comparing animated movies to their comic book source materials. In best case scenarios, I am able to bring attention to how great the original stories were to justify being retold in animated form to a larger audience, or how a mostly famous/infamous story was given changes in attempting to fix those stories after the fact. Sometimes we have even gotten the original writers to come and try to do self-adaptations of their own works, with varying results. Then on the other end of the spectrum, I have ended up shaking my head at how those stories were either changed too much to overcompensate for a past mistake, or they have made changes that took away the potential that made the original stories worth adapting in the first place. Going back to the Flashpoint example, none of the 3 adaptations it has been given included this scene, where the Reverse Flash makes the Flash remember all the bad things that happened to him growing up, which then makes the Flash realize and accuse the Reverse Flash for his mother's death, which the Reverse Flash then confesses in having been the real murderer. In conclusion, most of these movies were made with a fixed runtime and budget, which held the writers and directors to do what they can with what they were given, or with scripts that were random drafts that could have used some rewrites, which would have needed the producer's approval before being put into production. As a working adult who needs money to pay food and pay rent/mortgage, I understand that Jay Oliva and J.M. DeMatteis did what they could to get paid, and I so won't be holding the flaws of this movie against them. Okay, now let's actually talk about this movie. At best, it is an original story where, like Born to Kill, it has an A plot and a B plot in trying to balance out Bruce and Damian's relationship as a father and son, while at worst the Court of Owls is used as the B plot antagonists, with this Patchwork character doing what Morgan Ducard as Nobody was used for in Born to Kill. As far as I understand from watching this animated movie, it seemed to try having the same premise as Born to Kill, with this Talon character attempting to do with Damian what Morgan was as Nobody, such as approaching him when he is patrolling alone and telling Damian to kill the criminals he beats up. This starts with the movie's opening set piece, where the existing Toyman's son character Dollmaker was mixed together with the birthday boy from Batman Earth 1 to be used as a sacrificial lamb. In other words, this other Patchwork character is killed off while at Damian's mercy, and Batman is not around to see someone else kill him. Pretty much like with those tech robbers in the opening of Born to Kill. But then at some point of the writing process, some producer, probably James Tucker, must have realized that the Court of Owls needs to be given a boost in the media awareness of those DC fans who don't read the comics. And so, this movie ended up getting a patchwork with those two stories being retold in it. The Talon character, who killed the Dollmaker/Toyman's sons, is the most obvious sign of this, because if having him be Morgan Ducard would have been too hard to execute, what with him being a new character tied to a pre-existing character that most audiences assume to be someone else, then he should have been rewritten into being Lincoln March instead. That would have actually given his characterization a new layer, as he already believed to be Bruce's brother as Thomas Wayne Jr. But his motivations in trying to make Damian his sidekick would have been stronger if he also saw Damian as his nephew, and that way could have had a stronger case in making Damian choose a third option outside of his parents as his family, aka his uncle. Having been raised by the court, Lincoln would have been trained like a Talon, as we saw in the part 2 video, and the fact that the Talon is voiced by a former Batman voice actor, Jeremy Sisto from the New Frontier movie, that could have made it be even more obvious that he and Bruce are brothers. Or even make him be the older brother like Owlman is already. But instead he is just some no-name more forgettable than Morgan Ducard's Nobody, who just happens to look like William Cobb and is not even acknowledged to be related to Dick Grayson.
You would have made a good Talon.
Would make more sense if that was... They even look the same! Hey, they were as well said that it's William Cobb. I shall from here on refer to him as the Patchwork Talon, also to differentiate him from those revenants/zombies that this movie has and who are also called Talons. Then there is the Court of Owls in general, whose portrayal is not much better. I acknowledge that the comic did not show them much to establish how their hierarchy works. So this movie did have some legroom to make it up as it went on, but this was not even close to being better. There is a Grandmaster leading the court in this movie, whose identity is revealed to the audience to be some woman whose name I can't remember without looking it up, that Bruce is currently dating. That would make the implication be that she was evaluating Bruce if he could have been brought into the court as another one of Gotham's elite members. However, as the court is supposed to be a secret society like the Illuminati, I would expect them to know better than to let Bruce walk away to think about joining them after being invited, and keep on to their secrecy by forcing Bruce into either joining them or be killed.
But I'd like some time to think it over.
You don't get the time to think it over. You either join us or you're gonna be killed right now.
Well,
why are they letting him walk away? What vitun idiot? Either make him join you or kill him. As a matter of fact, Bruce either refusing to join or asking time to think about joining, that could have alternatively led to an action set piece, where Bruce would have needed to fight his way to freedom when the court refused to take
No.
or
I'll think about it.
for an answer. Then, just like how Bruce had to fight William Cobb Stallone in the part 1 video, that could make the court, or few in the court, to realize that he is Batman like Lincoln did. Sure, this would have led to a completely different kind of movie plot, but it would have portrayed the Court of Owls more confidently and made them more like a threat that their myth presents them to be. For some reason, the nursery rhyme was also changed from the one I asked people to read as a choir in the part 1 video into this.
the Court of Owls that watches all the time, gazing from the shadows behind cement.
Mitä
They see you at the heart. They see you in your bed.
Okay.
Take care.
What?
Beware, or they will send.
A talon for your head. Is it true?
Why did they change the nursery rhyme? Yes, Kevin Conroy was cast as Thomas Wayne in this movie. Maybe he was asked for it, or maybe he was visiting the studio for something else and filled in for someone else. We'll never know. Anyway, that flashback also makes the attempt to adapt the New 52 backstory of how Bruce tried to hunt for the court after his parents were killed, all the way to killing an owl in the attic of the Wayne Manor and finding his way to the old Harbor House, where there was nothing but an empty room collecting dust. What the movie, however, cuts out is the part where Bruce got trapped in there for a whole week like in the comic, and instead made his way back home to tell Alfred that he doesn't believe in the Court of Owls anymore. Then this version of the Court of Owls is also taken down a notch by establishing that their Talon assassins are lesser weaklings that expire if they stay too long outside of their cryo tanks.
Bring that setting up. Too cold and they'll shatter like glass.
Yes, Grandmaster.
They survived outside the caskets for more than 8 hours. The group before that lasted only 3.
And by studying our failures, we've refined the resurrection process. These men will be able to live for a full day before returning for regeneration.
Immortality, but only 24 hours at a time.
That is how Batman ends up surviving his first encounter with them by lasting long enough until they expire, as if the movie knew the scene had to end there. The runtime does include an attempt to pay homage to Greg Capullo's art when Batman ends up in the court's labyrinth, but that feels like it was set up as an excuse just to have it. And that set piece also makes the Court of Owls come across as even less of a threat than they were in the part 1 video. The reason why Batman ends up going to the sewers is, instead of examining the site where his great-grandfather Alan Wayne's remains were found, to instead follow the signal of the tracker he placed on the owl mask as Bruce Wayne, and instead of being caught off guard like in the comic, he is allowed to enter the owl's domain under Gotham. There Batman is then told that
We have eyes across Gotham observing and recording your every move.
As I suspected.
And did you also suspect that those ancient sewers have been flooded with an odorless psychotropic gas that enters through the pores of the skin, gnaws at the roots of the mind?
we don't have a week!
Back in on itself, twisting and winding until it resembles nothing so much as a labyrinth.
Actually, they could have done it so that Batman was trapped for a week, and the Talo that they had here could have been doing all of this while he was trapped in there. And so the labyrinth that Batman is then trapped in is revealed to be a drug-induced hallucination, with his experience being all in Batman's head. Outside of giving him an epiphany that also references the adult Damian as Batman 666, this is Batman at the Court of Owl's mercy, somewhat similarly as how he was during that week in the labyrinth in the comic. And they do nothing with him! They don't even observe him or have an enforcer looking out for him. They just leave Batman alone for Nightwing to find and bring back to the Batcave to recover. This is even worse than how the court had Batman at their mercy and played with him as their food for a week. Probably because this version of the court doesn't have William Cobb's Talon to look after Batman while he is in the labyrinth. And the only Talon that they have on call is busy playing Morgan Ducard with Damian. And at this point I should probably acknowledge the A-plot from Born to Kill. After the opening set piece, where Batman actually picked up a convenient piece of evidence of a third party who not blame Damian for the dollmaker/toyman's son's death, the next scene shows Bruce on a date with that woman who is eventually revealed to be the court's grandmaster. She learns about Damian's existence and Bruce decides it is for the best not to let her know that Damian is his son.
And who might this be?
His son.
I'm Damien. Bruce's...
My ward.
Son. You know, while I was working on this video script, I had a collaboration stream with Yay Heat where we went over Damian's history starting with Grant Morrison's comic run. Where at one point, aka in the 4th issue of Grant Morrison's Batman and Robin comic series, there was a scene at a party that Damian was attending and where the guests acknowledged him as the son of Bruce Wayne. This issue came out in 2009, so making Damian be presented as another ward like Dick Grayson before him is just done to make up more tension between the father and son. Not to mention, I remember how I brought up in my Batman and Son/Son of Batman video that Tim Drake was legally adopted as Bruce's son after 1 year later because the laws are not the same as back during the Dick Grayson Robin era. So Damian could have been explained to strangers as Bruce's son, be he adopted or the result of a past relationship. While Bruce attempts to ease up his father-son bond with Damian by having a movie night together, that is just above bare minimum that Bruce tries to be a good father to Damian. He doesn't even buy Damian a dog that he could name as Titus. After that, the movie makes the conflict between Bruce and Damian be that Bruce doesn't let Damian go out as Robin by himself, which is poorly explained to Damian himself while Nightwing is also brought in to act as his babysitter, and to exposit that Jason Todd and Tim Drake do not exist.
The pure and perfect Dick Grayson. The first Robin. Ugh.
Based on what I'm seeing, I was the only Robin.
You. The interactions that Bruce and Damian have after that are then after Damian has been approached by the Patchwork Talon like how Morgan did, and Batman has also had to survive an encounter with the quickly expiring Talons. Bruce is so already on the edge with Damian refusing to tell that he saved a couple from being mugged, and instead decides to double down when Bruce sees the sigh he got from the Patchwork Talon. Then after Bruce grounds Damian at the end of their verbal fight, he tells Nightwing that
he's not you, Dick. Before I took you in, you had loving parents. You had a heart.
And he doesn't?
That's not what I mean. Or is it? I don't know. Maybe biological ties aren't enough to make a man a father. Or a boy a son.
Which Damian eavesdrops and decides based on that to leave home to join the Patchwork Talon. Eventually Batman catches up with Damian as Robin with the Patchwork Talon after they have gone after an illegal gambling/organized crime den, kind of like the Ragandian embassy in Born to Kill, and where Damian didn't have it in himself to kill the bad guys running it. That is where the Patchwork Talon decides to make Damian choose between him and Batman. which, like I already said, would have had more of an impact if the Patchwork Talon was Lincoln March and believed himself to be Damian's uncle as Thomas Wayne Jr. For the movie's credit, the choreography of the following fight scene between Batman and Robin, being what the movie is named after, is portrayed mostly with Damian being the aggressor in it, while Bruce does his best to hold himself back, but taking the threat of Damian's assassin training attack seriously. In other words, the people making this movie were smart enough not to make this fight come across looking like a case of child abuse. Unfortunately, this encounter is only here because of the movie's title, and because it's here unlike in Born to Kill. This scene only makes both Batman and Damian look worse than in the comic, because Damian decides to double down and go join the Patchwork Talon, even after Bruce decided to take most of the damage at the end of their fight, falling from the roof to keep him alive. And because Batman next decides to go through the labyrinth set piece homaging Greg Capullo's art panels, where he gets the late epiphany about having been a poor parent to Damian. A lesson that Bruce in Born to Kill learned much earlier when Damian ran away from home. So, after Batman has been rescued by Nightwing from where the Court of Owls just left him to experience the labyrinth in his head, the Patchwork Talon presents Damian as Robin to the court as a potential new Talon, but when he is told to unmask himself, the Grandmaster, who was the woman Bruce was seeing in the beginning of the movie, recognizes him as the boy she saw at the Wayne Manor and realizes that Batman is Bruce Wayne. I would make a frustrated remark about the court not having tried to unmask Batman while he was at their mercy, but they didn't do that in the comic either, even when they had the better chance to try sneak in during one of his many micronaps that Batman would have needed to take during the week he was trapped in the labyrinth. Instead, in her infinite wisdom, the Grandmaster decides that having Damian killed would be the perfect chance to hurt Batman. But in hindsight, the better chance to hurt Batman would have been to keep him captive while he was hallucinating himself to still be in the labyrinth. So, I would like to point out now that this is the story moves the characters instead of the characters moving the story set piece of the movie, because the Patchwork Talon refuses to kill Damian at the command of the Grandmaster and instead decides to turn on the court and slaughter them all. This is pretty much what Lincoln also did in part 2 video off-panel, except as more of a spectacle that is as anticlimactic because Batman had nothing to do with taking out the Court of Owls here either. Also, remember how I described Morgan Ducard taking out Batman and Batman Incorporated as nobody, as a means of making Batman's legacy go out on a whimper? Well, that is how the Court of Owls seems to go out too, on a whimper at the hands of this nameless Patchwork Talon. What happens next after that is then something that would make more sense if the Patchwork Talon was Lincoln March. Because the third act climax that the movie decides to go for is when the Talons attack the Wayne Manor, and only Wayne Manor, seeing how we don't have the larger Bat family to go protect the other targets the court had in the comic. It is the motivational reasons why the Patchwork Talon wants to attack the Wayne Manor, which would have made more sense if he was Lincoln March if we go by his backstory, in wanting to return and take back the home he was refused of in believing himself to be Thomas Wayne Jr. Like, how it would have made more of an impact instead of saying,
End of the line, Bruce. Or should I say, Batman.
He would have, after potentially leaving clues of his identity for Batman to pick up, greeted Batman as his brother, Thomas Jr. Anyway, since Alfred never fished William Cobb out of the river like in the comic, it takes Damian having escaped from where the Patchwork Talon trapped him in, one of the Talon's containers, to report to Batman, Alfred and Nightwing about the Talons being weak against cold. We also get to see the hostile environment Bat armor, but in my opinion Jason O'Mara does not deliver the "Get the out of my house" line well.
Get the hell out of my cave.
And in the end, by the time when all the Talons have been taken down like the zombies they are presented as, I think the movie tries to go for the way how Damien ended up killing Morgan at the end of Born to Kill, with him ending up holding the Patchwork Talon at the side point. But unlike in Born to Kill, where Morgan was already defeated and tied up, with Damien being fatigued and having seen his father hold on to his principles, the Patchwork Talon decides to take back the Sai he had given to Damien earlier, and rage quits himself out of the movie.
Don't doubt your instincts.
No!
Oh, the wasted potential of a Rust product. Looking back at how Peter Tomasi actually wrote the Death of Superman movie years after Batman vs Robin, I think he should have been asked to do a self-adaptation on Born to Kill, like how Joe Kelly and Judd Winnick did with Superman vs the Elite and Under the Red Hood. But that is assuming that these DCAMU movies were not being made in a rush on a conveyor belt so that people could have jobs. That would actually explain how GM DeMatteis actually also wrote the script for the next movie, aka Batman Bad Blood, with Batman vs Robin actually ending by sending Damien to elsewhere, soul searching to figure out who he is after the agency to choose the Patchwork Talon's fate was taken away from him, for him to eventually come back when the sequel's conflict needs him. So, what have we learned here at the end of this four-parter? I think the most important lesson is to learn how to choose one story to adapt or retell, rather than picking two larger stories that can only be told together in a consented runtime. There were two stories here. Court of Owls technically divided into two halves, and Born to Kill as the other full story next to it. The heads at DC Entertainment and Warner Bros. Animation should have just picked one of them instead of both, and done what they did with the previous well-received adaptations in bringing the original author to write the adaptation. Scott Snyder was still busy writing his new 52 Batman run when these movies were in production, so Peter Tomasi should have been the obvious choice to be brought in to write it. But that is all said in hindsight, in which I do acknowledge that what I am asking is too much. The bar with these movies is rather low, and the best thing to say about them is that at the very least they were helping people stay employed, and that is more important than complaining about what the quality of these movies is, or how motivated the people making them were during their production. Having said everything there is to say in comparing all of this source material to the movie inspired by them, I will be moving on to my next immediate comic to adaptation video project that will be Grant Morrison's All-Star Superman, of which adaptation was written by Dwayne McDuffie while he was in a similar situation as Superman is in that story. Meaning that we will see how that affected his motivation in adapting that comic when I get into covering it. But before that, I still have one other video comparing two video games to rush out. So, while you wait for me to get those videos done, here is the reminder on how YouTube works. Like this video, comment what thoughts I have managed to awaken in your awareness with this movie, the comics inspiring it, and in these topics around them. Share this video for more people to see, and subscribe to my channel for those upcoming videos. Also, ding the bell for when I'm going to take time out of my editing schedule to stream video games for a chance to chat with me, and may your heart be your guiding key.